It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right. We're getting closer to the text now. As a matter of fact, if we time this right tonight, we'll actually start getting into more of the text, which I'm looking forward to. But remember from last week, this is all review, the Maccabean Revolt. You have Mattathias, an aged priest, refused to offer the unlawful sacrifice. And when another priest stepped up to do the job, he killed that fella and the guard that was overseeing the thing. And so Judas Maccabeus, what was his nickname? What's that? The hammer. That's right. Maccabeus, Greek for the hammer. Continued leading the attacks on the Syrian forces. And I've got it up there. I was going to review. And we're going to do that as we go throughout the class and try to hammer just a few things into our minds. But ushered in 80 years of independence. When was the next time that Israel enjoyed independence? 1947? After World War II? I think that's when they became a state, but I think they got their independence. Check me on that because I'm not positive about that. But that's a long time. So 80 years they got to have their independence and really enjoyed it. And remember the Feast of Dedication, Hanukkah, is still celebrated today. And this is what it goes back to, their golden age for Jerusalem. Can you imagine? For review last week, remember we talked about one word that Paul used that made them stop listening. What was that word? Do you remember? Gentiles. And they listened to him until that word, Gentiles, when he was speaking, and they just couldn't take that anymore. So that brings us up to the Maccabean Revolt and the Hasmonean Dynasty. But now we're going to go into the Roman period, and there's so much, and I realize, don't think that this is an in-depth class, although it might seem like it at times. There's so much that we could talk about this with the different emperors, with Julius Caesar and all of that time, but it's not intended to be an in-depth history lesson. But just take a good look at this picture. And this was in about 116 AD when Rome was at its zenith. Look at the area that it covered. You can just see, here's Italy, and over here, of course, is Israel. And all of this land they had control of. Imagine trying to keep track of that land from this little bitty area right here. They had people stationed at all of these different places. Reports would come in and out. How do we deal with this situation? How do we deal with that situation? And it has to be a difficult thing to do. Even just one country is difficult enough to keep everybody in line. And you can see that right now, can't you? But imagine all of these countries now under Romans' control. And this is just how far they went. This is from about 280 BC onwards. Rome had slowly continued to get stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger. It didn't happen overnight. But Egypt fell in 30 BC. And then Rome continued to grow to the 2nd century. And when Pompey entered Jerusalem, there was a little bit of resistance, but Israel was quickly defeated. There goes their golden age because of the Romans. But Pompey, of course, you think about this, when you go into a foreign land, you conquer it, you don't have the manpower to put people in every place that they're needed to be. And so you think politics is dirty and twisted today, and it is. But back then, they had to put, okay, we'll let you do this. You can have this power as long as you make sure that you keep control of your people. You make sure that they behave themselves, and we'll put you in power. Now, that's going to cost more money. Listen, this is how much tax we want from your people. Anything you get above that, feel free to keep it yourself. And so this is how they would work. And so they named... when Pompey came in, he named Hyrcanus II as the high priest because he thought he would be more loyal. And then, in order to rule this land, an Idumean by the name of Antipater, and we're going to talk a little bit more about him. He ruled from 63 to 48 BC. He was given local political leadership. And Idumea, and this is not the best map to show it, but it is in the southern part. Yeah, it's all the way down. Where's... This is just not the best map. Oh, over here. Yeah. Right down here. So he was down from this area right here. And so he put Hyrcanus as the high priest, and he named this Idumean Antipater, gave him rule over this area. So now you got to try to keep your people happy, and you also have to try to keep Rome happy. And we're going to see some problems with that as we go throughout this. The priesthood, the high priesthood, remained a separate institution from the Roman appointees. And so they would name theirs, whether he was qualified or not, they didn't care. So they would name theirs, Israel would recognize theirs, and so there was complications. You ever want to know why Christ having hearings before both Annas and his son-in-law Caiaphas? Because it was political. See? It had a part in all of this. The Jewish law, the priesthood was for life. You think the Romans were behind that? No, you tick us off one too many times. Doesn't matter. Life or not, you're done. You're not going to be in that role. And so Annas was appointed in AD 6 and deposed in AD 15. Caiaphas followed a short time later and held that office until 37. But there's a lot more we could say about that, but just wanted to put those two things right. Remember Antipater from Idumea, south of Palestine, Israel. He is named the ruler because that's going to be important for the time when Christ comes. But 7 major factors, and I think this is the last on your worksheet, if I'm not mistaken, worksheet number 2 that we gave you about a month ago. Here are 7 factors, the Roman period, 7 positives for the spread of Christianity. Remember we talked about the positives for all of the kingdoms that came up after Babylon. You had all these different kingdoms that came up, and we talked about the different things that would help Christianity when it would come around. Well, here are 7 things that Rome did that was a positive for Christianity. Number 1, Greek continued as the common language. Well, you might say, well, what's the big deal about that? Well, Rome, who spoke Latin, you would think, you're in our country now, we're going to make you speak our language. Well, they didn't push that. They allowed Greek to be the common language. What was the New Testament written in? Koine Greek, that common language. Remember we talked about that. So they allowed that to continue to happen. And everybody almost around the known world at that time was familiar with the Greek language. So that's number 1. The Greek language continued as the common language. Number 2, Roman peace. Roman peace. Now, if you were an Israelite, you probably didn't look at it as Roman peace. But Roman peace gave freedom from warfare over an expanse of time and space that hadn't been seen before or since in the Middle East. When I say a time of peace, it was peaceful because if you didn't do what Romans said, they would come in and squash you like a bug. So it was peaceful as long as you did what they told you to do. And so it was a time of peace. Anybody want to go over to Iraq with me besides Mindy? Anybody want to go over to Iraq with me right now? What about Syria? You want to go take a trip over to Syria? Tom would. If you're going. No, if I'm going. He's going to buy my ticket and send me. What's the problem? Why don't you want to go over there? I don't want to travel in those areas, do you? Not right now. Some areas, anyway. Well, the Roman peace, you could travel and enjoy peace throughout the entire nation. Remember that map I showed you? You could go all over. Now, how was that handy for Paul? That's right, the spread of the gospel. It's a perfect time, almost like it was planned, It was a perfect time for the gospel to come into this world. And I say that facetiously. You know I believe it was planned. Number 3, transportation and communication. There was the development during this time of the most advanced transportation and communication systems that really were not matched until about the times of the Reformation, when the printing press came along. This was it. I mean, we didn't really improve on it. The world really didn't improve upon it until the time of the Reformation, the 15 and 1600s. Listen to this. I don't have this up there. Maybe I should have. But let me just give you some statistics. Now, think about this. They're doing this without cars, without trucks, without airplanes. Okay, so keep that in mind. And think about you as one person. Okay? It's estimated that the Roman government's mail system covered 75 kilometers a day. It's a little over 50 miles, I believe. Now, that doesn't seem like much to us. But if you had to carry it by horseback or some other means akin to that, that's a long ways. And then listen to this. Messengers on horseback using relay stations could cover as much as 100 kilometers a day. So the mail system would cover 75, and then people on horseback that had a message that they had to send, 100 kilometers they could cover in a day. They would get to one station, change horses, change horses, change horses. As a matter of fact, the Pony Express was kind of based on this system. And so that's an amazing feat of technology at that time. So why was it important, do you think, for the gospel's cause that information could spread so quickly? Remember what Paul would say, when you read this letter, see that this church over here read it too. They had the system in place for that. Number 4, a cosmopolitan spirit grew. Cosmopolitan, did I mispronounce it? Cosmopolitan. Listen to what I mean, not what I say. Cosmopolitan. Especially in the cities. And this is important because it transcended national barriers. And you can think about this, even in our own time, we can relate to this somewhat. You know, when I was a kid, if I saw a foreign-looking person, my eyes just, oh, look at that guy. You can tell he's not from around here. And, he's dressed funny, he looks weird, he talks weird, and all of these things. Well, here, during this time, those cities were so integrated with so many different types of people that there wasn't the prejudices. I mean, there still were a lot, and we'll be talking about that when we talk about Herod, but not like it was before that time. And so Paul, a foreigner, could go into these cities. Peter, a foreigner, could go into these cities, and it wasn't as odd as it would have been before that. Number 5, elimination of many cross-cultural barriers. Because of the cultural and political unification that was happening at that time, Rome owned it all. You used to be, and still places like this on earth, I know, but during that time, if you walked across the wrong street and you got into the wrong, as we've talked about with the Jews and the Samaritans, I mean, it could cost you your life. Well, those were broken down to a large degree during this time across the Roman world. Here's an interesting one. Christianity was protected at the beginning because the Romans, a lot of them, and they didn't understand the Christian religion at all, and many of them just viewed it as another Jewish sect. That's just a sect of the Jews, and Judaism was protected under the Roman government, so since they thought Christianity was just a part of that, well then they were protected. And it wasn't until really Nero started with this hatred toward the Christian that things turned in a very negative way. And then the judicial process. The judicial process. It was enlightened and it was advanced. You got a fairer trial during this time. And you can really see how that came in handy. Look at a couple of places with me. Look at Acts chapter 16. Who do we know that took advantage of this quite well? Yeah. Look at Acts 16, starting with verse 35. Acts 16:35. And when it was day, the magistrates sent the officers, saying, "Let those men go." So the keeper of the prison reported those words to Paul, saying, "The magistrates have sent to let you go. Now therefore depart and go in peace." But Paul said to them, "They have beaten us openly, uncondemned Romans, and have thrown us into prison. And now do they put us out secretly? No, indeed. Let them come themselves and get us out." And the officers told these words to the magistrates, and they were afraid when they heard that they were Romans. You think back, if the Romans weren't as powerful as they are, and Paul said, "Hey, you beat Roman citizens openly. Now you need to tell everybody you were wrong openly." Well, if Rome wasn't as strong as they were, Paul said, "We don't care who you are. We'll beat you again if we feel like it." But once they found out what they were Romans, well, then their attitude changed a little bit. Look at Acts 22. Same thing really happens in that. Go to chapter 25, because there's only a couple verses and we can get to the point a little bit quicker there. Acts 25. And here's a prisoner. And listen to what he says. Look at verses 10 and 11. So Paul said, "I stand at Caesar's judgment seat where I ought to be judged. To the Jews I have done no wrong, as you very well know, for I am an offender or have committed anything deserving of death. I do not object to dying, but if there is nothing in these things of which these men accuse me, no one can deliver me to them. I appeal to Caesar." You see, there was some law in town. There was a new sheriff in town. You couldn't just do whatever you wanted to anybody. There was some accountability. Now, I'm sure the Jews didn't like that part of it, but it did bring some law and order to this. And then let's look at Galatians chapter 4. This is what I alluded to. And so try to remember everything that we've talked about thus far. You remember had the rise of the synagogue. Why that was important. You had the common language, and then you had all of these things during the Roman period that went into this. And then you come to Galatians chapter 4, verse 4. "But when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth His Son, born of a woman, born under the law." When the time was just perfect. Let me tell you something, and I know that you know this, but you can just sit and think about this. You know, we are told to meditate. In His law, doth He meditate both day and night. Just think about this for a little while. Would there ever have been a better time for the Lord to come than right when He did? And the answer to that is absolutely not. God knew exactly what He was doing, didn't He? He prepared us. And not just prepared the people, all the sacrifices and all the blood that went into it, and understanding what sacrifice meant. But then God having dealings in the affairs of men. Okay, you're going to rule this long because I need you for this. I'm going to let you come in power because I need you for this. I'm going to let you come into power because I need you for this. And then I often think, did God let us come into a power as the United States of America? And if so, for what purpose? And for how long? And so, those are just some interesting things. And I don't know that I can answer all of those questions. I can have some beliefs in the providence of God when it comes to our country. But here's the thing. It wasn't just for the United States of America, but it's for every country that's ever existed. India has a purpose. Russia has a purpose. What is that? Just something to think about when you don't have anything else to think about. All right, let's talk about Herod the Great. We'll start this tonight. We won't get to all of this. I gave you 2 handouts about him last week. And here's where we're going to really start narrowing down now. We're getting closer, and here are some things that we're going to try to drill into our heads starting tonight. And the first thing is about Herod the Great. Remember that Idumean I just told you about? Antipater? We're going to talk about one of his kin. And so this will be worksheet number 3 that you should have picked up tonight. Herod the Great. Herod ruled for 33 years. I think that might be the first question on your answer sheet. He ruled for 33 years. 33. Yes, ma'am. And he became an expert at placating the Romans. I mean, he was really good at this. If nothing else, he was really good at this. And he would make sure that he took care of their interests in the region. He kept the Jewish province intact. He kept it prosperous to a certain degree until a certain time. But in 40 BC, he was declared the king of the Jews by the Romans. And I think that's in there. He ruled for 33 years and was declared king of the Jews by the Romans. Now think about that. How would you like it if I told you, all right, Forest Hill, this guy over here is going to be your king. Imagine we're a city, a town, or even a nation. And this guy over here, he's going to be your king. But shouldn't we get a chance? No, listen. What did I say? This guy's going to be your king. But what about one of our... No, what did I just say? This guy's going to be your king. Now, you don't know this guy from Adam's house cat. But what's your attitude towards him right now? You don't like him. And you don't even know him yet. But why don't you like him? Because he was forced upon you, right? And so there's going to be some difficulties already in the attitudes of the people. So the Romans said, all right, Herod, you're now king of the Jews. And that was done in 40 BC. And that chart up there, I just wanted you to look at that. We're going to look a little bit more at some things as we go around here. But declared king of the Jews by the Romans in 40 BC. And he felt vulnerable as an outsider. As you can imagine. Imagine if you just got dropped off in a place and he did have some history there. It's not like he was completely unknown, obviously. But he felt vulnerable as an outsider. Especially with the Hasmonean families, the Maccabees and all of those. And so he married one of the Hasmonean daughters. Mariamne, that's how I believe you pronounce her name. Mariamne. But he was still looked at as an outsider. So get this in his mind. All right, these people don't trust me. I'm an outsider. What can I do to appease them? I know, I'll just marry one of their women. That's a great reason to marry, isn't it? For political purposes, I want you to be my wife. So people will like me. Well, that didn't go over very well. He was still an outsider. One of the things that he was really known for and that he did accomplish is, number one, his building programs. And I listed those up there. Here's some of the things that he had built during his time. The new harbor in Caesarea. The new harbor in Caesarea. And you can still look at all of some of the ancient ruins, and you can still see parts of this ancient harbors. And if I'm not mistaken, again, check me on this. This is history, not Bible, so it's okay if I'm wrong. But check me on it anyway. It's just interesting to me. Maybe it's not to you. I think there were 12 harbors that he built there. And you can still see parts of those today. And so 12 big ships could dock at the very same time, which was pretty interesting. It hadn't been done up until that time. Again, it may not seem like much to us today, but during that time, it was big. It was a big deal. The Herodian fortress, he refurbished the walls of Jerusalem. And he actually left that job to somebody else when they finished the temple, and I think it was destroyed like 6 or 7 years later. So they worked on that for all of these decades, and then it was destroyed in a few years. But he rebuilt the walls, refurbished the walls of Jerusalem. Exactly, and brought in huge stones. Matter of fact, look at Mark 13:1, and you may be saying, well, what in the world does this have to do with anything? Why are you telling us things like this? Hopefully it's going to come together as we put it together when we start looking at the text. But look at Mark chapter 13. Mark chapter 13. He reconstructed the temple and those huge stones that were there. In Mark chapter 13, verse 1, then as he went, talking about Jesus, out of the temple, one of his disciples said to him, Teacher, see what manner of stones and what buildings are here. That was Herod's doing. So he looked at that and said, look at these stones. Look at these buildings. This is an amazing feat. And then Jesus kind of rains on this parade and says, do you see these great buildings? Not one stone shall be left upon another that shall not be thrown down. And there was. That's exactly right. But he built these things. He also added theaters, a water system, horse racing track, a palace. He did a lot of building during his time. But you would think, well, man, he's building all of these things in our country. That just must have endeared all the people to him. But where do you think he got the money to do all of this building? Their pockets. They got it from their tax dollars. That's right. Matthew was one of those tax collectors. And so it made the royal families, especially in Israel, very bitter because it was their money that was going toward all of this building. He built his own palace, and guess who paid that? They did. The people did. The people did. In one of your handouts that I gave tonight, this is actually a copy that I made out of my Dixon Bible. Does anybody else have a Dixon Bible? You've got one of those. All right, it's in the back of that Bible. It's out of print now, unfortunately. But if you look at pages 1479 and 1480 in the Dixon Bible, which this is a copy of, that's why I could make a copy of it, here is the Herodian family. And I just wanted you to have that, because when you come across the name Herod, you're going to automatically think Herod the Great, but that's a mistake. Because there were several people who wore the title Herod. So you got to figure out, okay, which one was it? This little sheet will help you, okay, with that. So just put that in that folder that you have, and we won't be looking at that in class, but I wanted you to have that. So he was paranoid for good reason. There was always somebody who wanted to kill Herod. Always. And so he was paranoid. And because of this, as a matter of fact, let me read you. I say read you. Let me try to quote it, because check me on this too. I've got this right, but I believe it was Augustus, the Roman emperor, that said about Herod, I would rather be a pig in the house of Herod than one of his sons. Now, why in the world would somebody say something like that? And what in the world does that mean? I'd rather be a pig in the house of Herod than one of his sons. He was so cruel, and he was so concerned about people trying to usurp his power that he was having people killed quite often, even his own sons. And so what Augustus was meaning, I think, that a pig in his house would be safer than one of his sons. And of course he said it in jest, and it's kind of insulting, but it was true. Now I say that to just kind of get into our mind about how maniacal this man was. If he would kill one of his own sons, could you imagine? And then you start thinking, and this is what I do, and I don't know if this is the best way to do it or not, but as I read things in the Bible, I try to apply it and think about what would I do. You know, if one of my 3 daughters, 2 of which are here tonight, said, Dad, I'm taking over this house, I would fight them on it. But if they had the upper hand, I would give up before I'd kill one of them. Not Herod. Not Herod. And here's the thing. Many times, they had no interest in taking his power. But he was paranoid. Now, why is that important? Look at Matthew chapter 2. It was during his reign in which Jesus was born. Matthew chapter 2. Matthew chapter 2, look at verse 16. Well, look at verse 7. Matthew 2, verse 7. Then Herod, when he had secretly called the wise men, determined from them what time the star appeared, and he sent them to Bethlehem. You go and search carefully, verse 8, for the young child, and when you have found him, bring back word to me that I may come and worship him also. That's not what he wanted, and we know that. When they heard the king, they departed, and behold, then they were warned. We know all of that. But look at verse 16. So they tricked him. They didn't go back. They're not going to go back and tell him, because now they know why he wanted to know. He wasn't wanting to worship him. Now drop down to verse 16. Then Herod, when he saw that he was deceived by the wise men, was exceedingly angry, and he sent forth and put to death all the male children who were in Bethlehem and all of its districts from 2 years old and under, according to the time which he had determined from the wise men. Then was fulfilled what was spoken by Jeremiah the prophet, saying, a voice was heard in Ramah, lamentation, weeping, and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children, refusing to be comforted because they are no more. He prophesied about that, and this is what he was talking about. You want to know what a maniacal madman we're dealing with? He was so concerned about this little baby boy usurping his throne, his power, that when he was deceived and couldn't kill this one, he just went on a murderous rampage. That's Herod the Great. He wasn't great because he was a good man. Let me read something else to you. We're almost out of time, but let's end with this. And that's why you can understand why Augustus would say, I'd rather be a pig in that man's house than one of his sons, wouldn't you? This was on his death. We'll end here. I don't know if you can read that or not, but let me just read it to you. When Herod realized that his illnesses were fatal, he moved to his winter palace in the oasis of Jericho. There he had built lavish palaces, swimming pools, gardens in the base of Jericho's one river system. Herod ordered all of the noble Jewish families to come to Jericho to attend to him. Watch what this madman does. When they arrived, he had them herded into Jericho's hippodrome, which was a horse racing track, and told his soldiers to slay them the moment he died. So all the royal families, come here and take care of me. And then he traps them and he tells them, the minute I die, you kill them all. This was to promote natural mourning. While he was on his deathbed, he obtained a letter from Rome giving him permission to slay his 2 ambitious son, Antipater, not the one that we talked about earlier. He named his son after this. Got permission to slay his son. He did so immediately. Then he gave his will, and this is where we'll pick up next week. Archelaus would be king. He would take his place. Antipas would rule Galilee. Philip would rule the northeast regions. 5 days later, he died. When Herod was dead, the hippodrome was opened. No one was killed, and the people gathered together in the theater. Herod's will was read, and Archelaus was hailed as king. So in his dying days, he was having one of his sons killed, and he planned to murder a bunch of Jewish nobles. And you know why? So people would cry when he died. Evil, 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 isn't it? All right, Lord willing, next week we'll finish up Herod. And let me give you some homework before we quit tonight. Read these accounts that you have up there. The first one, Matthew 3, 13 through 17. Mark 1, 9 through 11. Luke 3, 21 through 23. And John 1, 29 through 39. All those scriptures that are up there. Read those several times this week if you can, and we'll talk more about it. And then next week we'll pick up with number 3 on your handout. And I've gone too long. Does everybody have that? Going once? Yep, John 1, 29 through 39.